Welcome to this special episode of Context is King, where I get to ask the questions, and joining us today is Andy Signor. You may know Andy as the founder of Screen Junkies, and a couple of years ago he was in the news for all the wrong reasons. He's joining us today on the show to discuss his new project, Hugging the Cactus. We're going to talk about cancel culture. We're going to talk about a lot more, including his role as an entrepreneur within Defy Media, who helped launch Screen Junkies. Andy, thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. Alrighty, so there's so much I want to talk about, without necessarily rehashing every detail, savory and less savory. But before we dive into your experiences, both as an entrepreneur and as a participant in the Me Too scandals of a couple of years ago, let's start off by talking a little bit about a couple of other incidents that touch on this theme of cancel culture, regarding Dave Chappelle's Netflix special, as well as Saturday Night Live recently fired after briefly hiring Shane Gillis. So I'm going to read you, first of all, did you get a chance to watch Dave Chappelle on Netflix?
Absolutely. I mean, I've posted videos on both of these topics, so I'm ready to discuss.
All right. So I'm going to read you quickly a quote. Chappelle has always been a daredevil comedian willing to take on a controversial stance or downplay a serious controversy for laughs, including his early 2000 skits about Art Kelly's court trials on Chappelle's show. But now he chooses to blatantly ignore the historic criticism against his style of comedy and the new loud and clear criticism from the trans community. His approach comes off like a defiant rejection of change at any cost as he keeps going down his path, drawing attention to the worst aspects of his important career. The biggest cost will be tarnishing his own legacy, end quote. So what does that say about 2019 when Vice Media, which started in our city, Montreal, as a tits and ass magazine basically, finds Dave Chappelle too shocking and basically saying, you don't need to watch it. Cancel the show, you can't watch this. And Wall Street Journal, owned by Rupert Murdoch essentially, is coming out and defending Chappelle. What are your thoughts on this? I would love to just get your thoughts on this juxtaposition.
Yeah, I mean, Vice used to do such hard-hitting journalism. Like, it really was like that push. They'll push whatever boundaries they can. And now I don't know if it's just they're not doing the revenue anymore or whatever, but it's just resorting to this clickbait. Any article that says you don't need to watch this, to me, is dangerous, because that's not commentary, that's not criticism, that's just totalitarian telling me what to do. And of all places, of Vice doing it, it's the hypocrisy is crazy to me. That special, to me, he succeeded. I mean, as I've said in my piece, it's sticks and stones, right? Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I feel like the entire intent of that special was for Chappelle to try and hurt everybody with words to prove the point that we as a society have become so I hate to use the word soft, but there is a little bit of like softness of just like, we can't live the way we were, and you're now offended by everything. Where are the lines? What are we allowed to make fun of? What are we not allowed to make fun of? And it's a very important and I think a big conversation that I think he's spurred, and I'm all for it.
Do you think some of this has to do with age? Like, I'm 41, I manage a team of about 50 people. And I do see, and I don't kind of like rag on like, oh, millennials, I discount them. I feel every younger generation gets an unfair rep in certain ways. And this generation has its own challenges with basically student debt, living through, nonstop wars. Like, we're not going to kind of say like, oh, they've had it easy. It's just unique challenges. But I do get a sense that a lot of the jokes that earlier generations made, some of which were clearly outrageously racist and sexist, but even the things that are kind of like somewhat tame and, lame even by joke standards, are no longer accepted. Is Chappelle just an old cranky dude? Or no, he's actually right, and he's just one of the few people that kind of has the equivalent of money, that he doesn't need to appease every critic or every possible viewer. Like, is Chappelle right or wrong on this front? Could it be that basically he's just old and times have changed and they've passed him by?
Well, I don't think times have changed in the past by. I think he has not been canceled. People tried to cancel him, but he has an audience for it. I mean, is there an audience that's against him right now? Yes. But is there an audience that supports him? Yes. So I think it depends who's asking the question. To some people, yes, he's seen as old. I mean, I watched Patton Oswalt, right, has now criticized Shane about Saturday Night Live. We'll talk about that next. But it's like, Patton Oswalt is now a very leftist, liberal sort of joins the young community if you're going there, of like, we support everybody. But he's done a lot of trans jokes in his past as well. And so it's ironic to watch him now go after comedians and comedy when it's like, where, well, what are we allowed to, what is off limits? And to me, I think Chappelle even said it in his Q&A, like, people were on him saying, oh, you're just using, like, it's like saying you have a black friend. But he talks about how he had a fan who was trans who came and spoke to him. And she made a very good point of, I think what you do is normalizing it. And to me, that's very important in comedy. Like, if one group's off limits, then who's in control of which groups are on limits and who aren't? Like, that to me is where it's a very dangerous slope. And I think that's what he's challenging. And did he say some things that are offensive? Sure, to a lot of people he did. But did he say things that he's allowed to say? And I think that had a context of comedy behind it. I absolutely do. And I'm going to defend his right to say it. But I think what he did more importantly is we started this conversation that I'm so glad so many people are having, because I do think we need to be careful of just saying, well, no, you can't make fun of that. That you can't make fun of. I think that's where things are dangerous.
Yeah, it was Daphne, by the way, the member of the Tees, as he calls them. Look, I actually saw his special recently, and I had gone into it expecting, like, the expectations were set so high. I was expecting him to just offend and, for me, my eyes to, to bleed from it. But in the end, I actually found it relatively tame. I found it relatively tame, to be honest with you. Maybe because the expectations were so high. And then I went recently, and Netflix loaded up. The algorithm on Netflix loaded up his 2007 Age of Spin special. And I actually think, Dave, it's more, he is actually citing his own insecurities, his own ignorance, his own perspective. Like when he was talking about Kevin Hart and the success he's had. So removing something as like, possibly shocking and sensitive as, race and gender and sexual orientation and all that. But when you hear him talk about Kevin Hart, and the success he's had and the way his son was kind of a fan, you actually pick up that he's kind of addressing what he said was, he goes, I have no problem. Like, Dave, the American, loves to see the, transsexual community, transgender community do so well. But the black Dave Chappelle, now that guy's pissed off that these guys lapped us somehow. So I think you have to put arts, which comedy is a subset of, under that there's kind of a bigger point being made and you can disagree with it, but like, I just don't like the fact that, well, who gets to say what is, tasteful or tasteless? But in any case, don't want to dwell too much on Chappelle. I want to use it more as a as a jumping point to now talk about SNL. So SNL hired 3 comedians, one of whom was, to my surprise, the first Asian American, which is kind of shocking that there's never been a full-time Asian American cast member.
Rob Schneider was part Asian.
Yes.
And Nassim Petrad was also, but this is the first East Asian.
Yeah, East Asian. Exactly. Now, what's interesting is Rob Schneider actually came out and made a comment. But before we do, so what were your thoughts on the Shane Gillis situation? How is that similar, different to the Chappelle, and just your thoughts on that?
I think he put Saturday Night Live in a tough spot. I think that is the real reality, and they have every right to fire him. Whether they should have or not is I think the real question for me. Were his things offensive? Is where we're at that same line of, well, what's offensive and what's not. When he used that derogatory slur, when I played it back to do my research, he did it in character, right? Right or wrong, like, he wasn't just saying it flippantly. Some would say he was, but he was saying it in a character of like, oh, well, let's put them all there as sort of like the rich, white, racist guy who's in charge of the world. I took it as that. Like, there was comedic context. I didn't really find his stuff funny, but I defend the right that he did do it in a comedic way. He's got to be prepared that that's going to offend people. It is going to offend people. And Saturday Night Live has a right to then react when people are offended. And I think that's the real core of it. And he admitted that. And then I did a whole video because he did a little shot when he got fired. He's like, well, I was always a Mad TV guy anyway. And that really opened my eyes because I go back and I remember Mad TV. They did a lot of really heavy stereotype racist comedy back in the day, including Alex Bornstein, who did her Miss Swan character, who's pretty much wearing yellow face and would get glorious applauses. So to me, it's like, it did sort of show the hypocrisy of where we are today as a society of like, he did his bit about how, he can't understand, in the Chinese restaurant. Mad TV did it again 20 years ago where are the lines? And I think it's important we have these dialogues and who's in charge of what's offensive, what's not. I didn't like this him using the slur. I don't like that. I don't use those words. At the same time, I have to like try to step back and be like, okay, he did it in a comedic subtext. He's allowed to make those jokes. But I think he's also allowed to have people be offended. I mean, people are allowed to be offended by it and say, you know what, we don't want you on that show. The line is not, people keep saying to me as I get in this fight with people like, freedom of speech, freedom of speech. Absolutely freedom of speech, but freedom of a company to say, we don't want that speech here. And I think that really sums it up. And I actually thought Andrew Yang really handled it really well too, of sort of trying to find that middle ground. Like, look, let's not fire him. Let's have a conversation and figure out why he doesn't understand the ignorance in what he's saying. And that is where I wholeheartedly lay down on this, because I feel like we have to talk versus just cancel, because I don't think he had malicious intent behind it. And I think that's sort of the difference for me of what makes someone racist or not. Are you out to say I'm a superior race and don't believe this, or are you just ignorant to the the facts? Is where I took it.
Yeah, first of all, to paraphrase Jerry Seinfeld, I was more offended by the lack of comedic humor in Shane's shtick. I felt like it wasn't really very funny. And I feel you talk about comedy. I feel that's the beautiful thing about comedy. If you could nail the tone, the content, the context with the right audience, and it's funny, then you can get away with murder. But the problem is when you use the race card and when you use the gender card and the homophobic card and all those cards, if you don't deliver it, then it falls flat. And then it's like risk return. Then the repercussions are greater. What I felt was a bit lame, corporate BS PR spin, and it's a shame coming from someone like Lorne Michaels and SNL, to just say, oh, the vetting didn't meet our standards, which I think is bullshit, because I don't think SNL has any vetting standards. There's a lot of people connections, people you've gotten high with and drank with and, like you have fun hanging out with and decide to give them a shot to some extent. And sure, some track record of either stand-up or comedy or whatever. But I think it's a missed opportunity. You said we should have some of that discussion, and we said, well, who gets to decide what's funny and what's racist? Well, I'm not saying Lorne Michaels should decide, but if somebody like Lorne Michaels comes out and goes, you know what, I'm sorry guys, but times have changed. And certain things that may have been accepted in the past no longer really are. And at least right now, we not only have to increase our standards, we have to set certain standards. And you know what? We recognize it's impossible to be aware of everything that everybody says or does or posts or tweets or takes or whatever. And in a situation like this, these things were unearthed and it wasn't just acceptable. And we don't, especially in the context of hiring the first Asian American full-time cast members, we just made the decision. Now that's a bit more, but I feel like it was a big opportunity was missed to kind of bring a little bit of clarity by somebody that has a lot of authority in the comedy world, like Lorne Michaels. But again, it is what it is. Missed opportunity more than anything else. Now, what's interesting is you brought up Rob Schneider. Rob Schneider actually wrote very recently after the firing. He wrote, quote, "As a former SNL cast member, I'm sorry that you had the misfortune, Shane Gillis, of being a cast member during this era of cultural unforgiveness, where comedic misfires are subject to the intolerable inquisition of those who never risked bombing on stage themselves," end quote. I mean, what do you think of that, and especially what you said about Andrew Yang and how he reacted?
Well, I think, there's a difference between doing it in a podcast with your friend than bombing on stage, right? To me, there is a completely different atmosphere. So it's not like he did it on stage to booze and had the balls. He did it in his privacy with a friend. And honestly, some of those conversations you probably get too honest and shouldn't put on air, because especially if you want to go on Saturday Night Live. And I think at the same time, like, Lorne Michaels doesn't want to put himself in this race. There have been accusations about him in the past, right? And so he doesn't want to touch any of this. He wants to play it safe. I don't know what the facts are. I don't care. I'm not trying to judge the guy. But I think you're right in that. It's a very safe, he did something wrong. We got to push him out. I don't want to get engaged. Let's do this. Lorne Michaels probably didn't even know who this guy was until he watched the audition tape.
He doesn't know who he is now. He still doesn't know who this guy is.
No, he doesn't care. I mean, Lorne Michaels is so busy, he never gets to talk to Paul Simon. He sets his haircuts to be timed with Paul Simon so they can catch up. That's just how we got to put Lorne Michaels in a whole nother context of that's how rich and out of touch Lorne Michaels is. That he can't make time to talk to Paul Simon, so he schedules his haircuts with him. I put Lorne Michaels in a whole nother sort of weird place of that guy just is that can do what he wants. He doesn't want to get involved with this. So I get all that. I think Rob also has, not worked in a while. And I think he is a little bit more conservative, and he's on that boundary, and he's annoyed, and good on him for standing up for himself finally and having a world where he can sort of say what he wants and defend someone without the fear of Hollywood squashing him. Because Rob Schneider, I feel, has got to that point where he's like, I don't care anymore. I'm going to say what I want. And I think that's what people like nowadays. People are starting to find genuineness and want to say, you know what? Yeah, this is frustrating me. And I'll back to Chappelle. That's why I think so many people are connected to Chappelle, because they're like, yeah, why is everyone so sensitive? Like, this is funny. He's allowed to make these jokes. That's where I think we're headed.
I mean, absolutely. Even the people that get all kind of flustered and talk about freedom of expression, I mean, it's like, well, freedom of expression is vis-a-vis censorship by the government, right? I mean, it's like if a corporation, publicly traded or for-profit corporation decides to do something, it's their right. So in this case, I think SNL, like you said, had no choice. It's funny because Rob Schneider apparently way back took out a full-page ad in a newspaper saying, I will never work with Mel Gibson, which I didn't even know about that until Twitter or somebody pointed out. And he replied, he goes, it was being sarcastic. I wasn't serious. But in any case, okay. So since you seem to accept humor, I wasn't sure how I would get this in. I want to change gears a little bit and talk a little bit about, your journey. So look, I hope you have a sense of humor. On a scale of Aziz Ansari, Louis C.K., Harvey Weinstein, and Bill Cosby, where does Andy Signor kind of accusations at the onset where they were made, where did that fit in your opinion?
Oh, on the onset, unaccurately, Weinstein. I was literally placed next to Harvey Weinstein as number 2. This was the day after Weinstein, and people were confused, and people were like, "Believe women," and they just immediately thought everything about me was accurate. I think the reality, though, is you put me closer to the Aziz area of bad date and clearly miscommunicating or having a misappropriate situation with a person who was offended later. That's where it really ended up. But yeah, when it happened, it was I'm still next to him. A lot of sites actually have started to retract things quietly and taken things out since my story has come forward, because I think, they saw I'm litigious, and I think we're scared of libel and other things. Some haven't. And a lot of articles just didn't want to touch it. When I came forward with my evidence to sort of prove, like, guys, yes, I made mistakes, but I am not in a serial, I'm not a sexual assaulter, abuser. I wasn't doing majority of the things that were written about me were just false. When I did my statement and sort of called out how quick the media was to respond to it, they all just I had an interview set up at Fox News. I had Hollywood Reporter, a lot of stuff ready to go with my publicist the night before the video dropped. As soon as they saw the video, all of them ghosted me. And it was just very telling. And my publicist was just shocked. He's like, you called the media on blast, and they don't want to be on blast. They don't want to do it. They knew exactly what it was. They didn't care. But then once they saw the context of it all, they're like, yeah, you know what? We might have screwed up. We're not going to touch this. And so that was really terrifying. So yes, it was. And I think that's what happened early on. And I think it's starting to happen less. But when in those first early days, everybody was just locked into that same category of Weinstein. And that really upsets me. That I'm not Harvey Weinstein, and there are people in the world who think I am. And so I realized I had to fight back once I was legally able to really try and clear my name, just to try and work again to support my family, because just the media and the bias against it was just that people read a headline, and then when the apology or the correction happens, it's the byline on page 10. And so you really got to get out there the best you can. So thank you for letting me speak. And that's what I've been trying to do, is get out there and not have parameters set. Like I'm here to talk about anything. I made mistakes. I'm willing to talk about them, but I also didn't do a lot of the things that were, challenged towards me.
Yeah, that's interesting, because on my end, I'm always looking to balance perspectives, right? I mean, if I'm sitting with someone and they take one drastic opinion, I'll just want to point out, well, have you thought of this other side? So when the news broke a couple of years ago, I won't lie, I'd seen an honest trailer here and there, but when you're a producer, you're in the trenches. I was building Watch Mojo. I knew more of Defy Media because years ago we looked at partnering with Defy ourselves. And so there was no reason for me to assume that these were lies, because also you personally didn't really come out and say much at the time. And then there was just this kind of like tsunami of other people accused, so I forgot about it. And then when you started, I guess a couple of years ago after settling, you started to kind of present the facts and your side of it. Took me a while, I was busy, and then once I was just like, weekend, nothing better to do, your video came up in the algo and I started to watch it. And I thought it was rather insane what you went through. So I was like, I could see that clearly all of the media that had covered the story had never updated it. They had never done anything. And I was just like, not that I felt this like obligation personally, but I was like, it seems like this is an interesting follow-up that merits to be heard. So I guess that takes me to my next question is, if you think of friends, not Friends NBC, but friends and family, if you think of colleagues, former colleagues, if you think of clients and partners past, present, and those hopefully in the future that you need, and then finally the media, what has been their reaction as you've come up with, an honest defense of yourself and talking about hugging the cactus?
The reality was, in my situation, like I was unfaithful to my wife, and that was something I knew I had to take accountability for and not just say I'm innocent, I did nothing wrong. No, I made some mistakes in my life, absolutely, and it took that time of those 2 years to really, through therapy and just my own self-work, like figure out, why did you do that to somebody? Because that alone wasn't okay, and I think that was a lot of reasons some of my friends weren't happy with what I did. But because it was a colleague, girlfriend that came forward, there was a sort of this personal, like, oh, what do we do? I was instructed not to talk, by Defy, and then by my, after they let me go via press release, by my lawyer, to not talk, because there was obviously more to the story that I needed to pursue, and I needed to follow the legal, advice. And so, in hindsight, do I wish I could have defended my name sooner? Absolutely. But did it allow me to mature and come back, I feel like, stronger, as a stronger, healthier person? Yes. So it was a tough spot to be in, because so many people just bought the worst in me, and they thought that the worst things that were written were true, and that I was a monster, Weinstein, just, with all this. And I think it's important, and whether it's comedy or any of this stuff, like, intent is important. And a lot of the stuff that was shared, and a lot of the people that came forward with sort of DMs that read really creepy, the context is important. A lot of those didn't share the chats before, and a lot of the other things around it. And what I was caught doing, and I'm guilty of, is I was outside my marriage flirting with my fan base. I absolutely did that, and I'm ashamed of that, and I'm not happy I did that. But that's all I did, and I didn't do that with intent to have notches on my belt or be a sexual predator, which is what the media and my accuser painted me out to be. And I knew I had to come out hard to prove that wrong and fight that and deny that, not just for myself, but for my children, but also just for my credibility and my name, to try and hopefully people like yourself, who I looked up to and admire, to sort of just have conversations with me again, so I'm not blacklisted from society. Because really what cancel culture pushes you to do is to go work, minimum wage. And that's not any knock on that, but I'm going to resort to that if this YouTube algorithm keeps killing me, and my freelance gigs wash up. But, I've spent my entire career doing something and becoming very good at it. And I don't really have the experience to go do some of the other middle level jobs that so many people are fighting for. So I'm now stuck in an employment situation that is really tough. And so I have the choice of just giving up and then, going and getting the minimum wage and just sort of saying, whatever, or fighting back and trying to rebuild what I lost and do it myself this time, and really try to also do some good and make content that feels important to me, and try and really do that. And I realized that's what I want to do. That's who I am as a person. I'm a content creator. I believe in content. I feel like I'm good at making content and knowing the pulse of the internet and all that stuff. I've built a lot of channels of success. Why should this mob and this culture just say I can't ever do that again? I don't want to subscribe to that. I want to be able to prove for my kids, for others out there, like, you can get back up as long as you take accountability and you choose a healthier path, a more positive path, and you fight. I'm going to do it. It was really humbling to come back and to do, go from millions of viewers to hundreds of viewers. There was a lot of support, and I was very grateful. And it really opened up my eyes to sort of see, wow, the people, especially outsiders, they saw for what it was, and they saw you did make mistakes, but I see that you're genuinely trying to make up for this, and I want to support you. You've made Honest Trailers was a huge part of my life, and I don't like that Screen Junkies is trying to wipe you from the masthead, when the reality is we didn't have all the facts. And sure, you made some mistakes, but how do we forgive and educate and move forward and actually hear your side of things? And I think I realized was something important for me to fight back on. And that's why, to then, get to the point of why I'm here and why I'm glad we're able to talk, is I wanted to take this spotlight that was on me suddenly again, to try and shine on other people who were being canceled. And I saw when I got canceled and that statement came forward, so many people emailed me with their own stories. And I went and vetted them and talked to them and tried to get more of the story. And I just saw that there was just a lot of stuff happening where it was just really unfair. And beyond just the unfairness of canceling, there were no paths to redemption. There was no platform willing to hear them. And that really bothered me. And so I thought, well, what have I got to lose at this point? Let me try and be a platform for them. And so I'm out now currently trying, did my Kickstarter and I got that goal, thankfully. And I'm creating a new series where I'm going to talk to people who've been canceled, some of which did something wrong and some of which did nothing wrong. And just talk about our shared sort of feeling of what it's like to be canceled, how that affects us emotionally. How do you stand up from it and still keep going? And that's sort of the new message and new sort of spirit that I'm trying to, do moving forward.
So what's easier to overcome, the naysayers or the Google YouTube algorithm?
The algorithm. The algorithm is a monster, and beyond just the algorithm, I mean, just I do a video about Shane Gills that gets me suddenly I'm in 10,000 views, which for me is a big deal right now. But they limit it because just the topic alone makes YouTube doubt it. And so I don't even make full revenue on just a clip where I'm talking about someone in a controversial topic. So beyond even the algorithm, it's the ad. It's just you can't win on there. But that's where I have my largest platform and my largest audience, and I got to try and use it. And I realize even having a hit can help you filter down to your other videos because you got to feed the algorithm if you want to be in the YouTube game, or you're going to lose. And so I'm hoping to find a voice there and find enough and then build enough of a following that I can use offsite methods to try and raise funding, Patreons and whatnot, Kickstarter projects, because I realize that's just how you succeed now, or find distributors or other partners to work with. Because I feel like, there are other methods beyond YouTube, but YouTube is the biggest search engine and you got to be on it. You can't just deny it. But yeah, the system is broken currently on YouTube. It's really crazy, but at least it's sort of, everyone's feeling it. Like there's a little bit of a unified of everybody has the problem, even the biggest players. I see Phil DeFranco complaining and I'm like, come on, Phil, you're doing okay. You don't, like when the littler creators, the ones near me, it really affects them and their bills. And so it's a tougher game when they won't even, announce your video to your subscribers. I mean, what is the point of a subscription button if it doesn't alert them that a video is there? You know what I mean? It's mind blowing to me.
I used to think of the Me Too movement as, okay, this is kind of like another version of like the civil rights movement, which is kind of calling out injustice. But at the same time, you kind of see that, well, not all these cases are the same. You are at one extreme. If not cancel culture, if cancel culture isn't the remedy, but at the same time you want to call out bad behavior, what do you envision as a framework?
Well, I think everyone's got to take accountability. I was really impressed when Stephen Colbert sort of addressed Les Moonves. It was just sort of a class act on how you handle such a situation when you're stuck in that situation, because he was loyal to Les still in that sort of monologue he made where he's like, look, this guy was everything to me. He made me. But accountability needs to hit all levels. And I think he's right. And I think that was sort of a way where you can still not just say, well, I'm going to ghost this person and not acknowledge them, but I'm going to also acknowledge if they did something wrong, we need to hold them accountable. And I think that is really the best way to handle it moving forward. I think this idea that we as a society, whether we're involved or not, we just sort of cancel people left and right without getting the facts. I think due process is incredibly important. There's a scary thing where I see a lot of in my audience too, of just people who now are just like, well, no, all women are liars. We must just believe all men. And it's like, whoa, that's not at all what I'm trying to support in the slightest. I want to believe all people, because I think it's really dangerous when of course we need to believe women, but if someone's adamantly saying, I didn't do this, we need to believe them too. We need to sort out and figure out, well, how do we figure out what's real here? That's the reality of where we're at. So we do have to weed out bad behavior. People have to take accountability when they make those mistakes. And a society is allowed to not subscribe to a channel. It doesn't mean we have to cancel them. This push to push them over the edge is where I think it's really dangerous. And there was I got in a video about it, but there was a person, this named Alec, game developer, who committed suicide after being charged. I don't know the situations of that. I don't know Zoe Quinn, who was in that, and there was a complicated thing. I don't even mean to get into the weeds of that, but it just shows how far it can get, where when you push someone and they lose everything, it can cost a life. And we have to be careful as a society to not just push without getting more information. When you make an accusation online, that's not in a court of law or a police station. That there's a little bit of well, why are you doing this publicly? There's a little bit of we have to ask that question too, I think, sometimes. And we need to make sure, well, what harm can this cause if we actually, we can support someone who's saying something that's atrocious, but we have to be careful then what that means to the person who's being accused. I've given this advice to everybody. Like, if you see someone in their house is burning down, whether they lit the match or not, check in on their family. Like, make sure they're on a path to helping themselves. That's where I'm at, and I feel like that's what we need to do as a society. It's like, of course we need to call out bad behavior, but we have to be careful of who's calling out the behavior. We have to be calling out what the accusation is. Did the person who's being accused, did they get a chance to respond? Once all of those facts are out, then people can choose whether to support that person or not. But this need to, gladiator style, sort of just, no, you're out, push them out, better one's in. It's just, that to me is where I think the line is dangerous and people don't see it. People's endorphins get boosted when they like a movement online, and they don't even really think about, well, what I think a lot of the majority don't even really think about, well, how will this affect their family when I publicize this, and just someone who's complaining. My point is, it's complicated. We need to have these kind of dialogues. We need to be open. We need to respond and report on stories when truths come out, when inaccuracies are shown. We need to report them just like we report the accusations, or we need to stop reporting them so wildly until we get more information about it. I think that's starting to happen now because of all this Me Too backfires and things. But I support the Me Too movement. I just think we have to be careful, because I think people have used the movement in dangerous ways. And I think bad behavior, like I said, needs to be called out, but we have to make sure there are paths to redemption for people who made mistakes and weren't racist or sexist or abusers. And what happened in this movement, a lot of casualties were, I think there were some people who did terrible things, like Weinstein. I do stand by. I think Weinstein made some terrible things. I listened to his audio. Like, he's done some stuff that's very questionable and I don't support. But everybody in this movement of Me Too has been sort of lumped in with him. And I think Aziz Ansari shouldn't be compared to Harvey Weinstein. Did he make some mistakes? Yes. Has he come forward and addressed them and apologized? Yes. Should he never work again? Absolutely not. So that's where I think these, where bad behavior, Aziz Ansari is the perfect example of, like, there's a lot of people who think he didn't do anything wrong. And he's still apologizing and doing what he can. But there are people who will never support Aziz Ansari. And I'm just shocked by that. There's nothing he can do to show remorse or to grow as a person. To me, shows where the dangers of the movement are, because who as a human hasn't erred or made a mistake in their life? Who has had a miscommunication in a relationship? I mean, all these Me Too stories where it's a relationship that's toxic, I don't even want to talk about it and get involved, because more often than not, they're both lying, but neither of them are telling the truth. There's somewhere in the middle. So we just have to be better judges in reality and on Twitter, and not just be so quick to judge, I think, is the real solution here, and make sure you're gathering facts and hearing both sides.
All right, on that note, Andy, thank you very much for joining us. As I started to kind of look at the facts in your experience, I was just thinking it was a very kind of tragic, sad, unpleasant thing for all parties involved. And I just sincerely hope that everybody comes out of it in a better position. So thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And anybody out there, if they have a story they want to share, they can find me at Hugging the Cactus. You can go to uncanceled.com or look me up on Popcorn Planet. But yeah, thank you so much, Ash, for having me. It's been awesome talking to you.